Welcome to the Business Spotlight Series. My name is Mark McNulty, and I'm president of Action Coach Bluegrass in Southern Indiana. And today I have Kenny Coleman with me, who is the co-founder and COO of Pursuit Spirits and also the Bourbon Pursuit podcast. So welcome, Kenny.
Thanks for having me, Mark. It's always interesting to be on this side of the microphone because I'm usually the one doing all the interviews.
Yeah, so you'll have to tell us how that started from podcast to what you've got now with Pursuit Spirits. So today, folks, we're going to be asking Kenny about his business and the challenges of growing a business in the bourbon industry here in the bourbon capital of the world, and let you know what it's really like to start a business. So Kenny, thanks for being here. So tell us how this all started with you and Ryan, your partner, and as a podcast and grew into the business you have today.
Yeah, to put the cart before the horse, maybe we should have just stayed in bourbon media because this is definitely the hardest business and probably the toughest challenge that we've ever had. But yes, to your point, we have a very unique story in the fact that we started with a medium of talking to people and interviewing people inside the bourbon industry. That started back in 2015. It was really a way for us to start learning more about bourbon, really get into it. But we also wanted to share the stories of the people that are in the bourbon industry. It's like, how do you connect with the brand that you know and you see on the shelf, and you want to know about the people and the personalities and everything that happens about it? And we just go all in. I mean, it is a full encompassing, just bourbon geek kind of podcast that we do, but we really own that niche. We've been able to build an audience from there. Bourbon Pursuit reaches around 50,000 unique listeners every single month. It did 2.2 million downloads back in 2022. And we're getting ready to break that record again in 2023. So we just look at it as a real blessing on what we've been able to do and what we've been able to accomplish just from sharing the stories of people that are out there and having, again, people just connect with those brands. Now, for us, there was really no idea of like, oh, we should also start our own bourbon brand. It kind of feels like a natural progression. That's the way that it should have gone, but it was really just happenstance. We ended up talking about a brand on the podcast, and then about 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from somebody and he goes, "Hey, I helped build that brand. Would you be interested in starting your own?" And that's when we started learning all the ins and outs of the industry. What does it take to actually start a business in a government regulated industry, and liquor licenses, laws, and taxes, and all these other things that we had never been privy of before. But at the same exact time, it's just so cool to be able to do this because now the podcast is actually probably the best it's ever been because we're not asking people very generic questions of be like, oh, what's your favorite part of being a master distiller? Which is anybody that's unaware. Those are people that make a lot of the whiskey inside the distilleries. We actually get down to the weeds. We can ask business-oriented questions, and that has really brought on a new dynamic of making more educated consumers. But it's been a fun road and a good challenge. So we actually started our own bourbon business back in 2018, a few years afterwards, but we didn't really start taking it, I'd say, quote unquote, seriously, where we started bringing on a lot of money, a lot of funding, like I said, a lot of debt to be able to buy a lot of whiskey and being able to put out products that are now on store shelves in 9 states across the country, with more to grow here over the next few years too.
So you've got a partner. How do you and Ryan kind of split the duties?
We're a very good partnership, very yin and yang. Ryan is definitely good at building relationships. He's definitely got I'd say the superior palate. He takes the master blender role in what we do. I come from a technical background. Ryan and I, we actually still have our day jobs trying to build this thing and make this side hustle a real position and a real business for us. And I come again from the tech side. So I am very process focused, very process oriented. So I've taken on the COO role because I love making sure that things are lining up the way they're supposed to be. I take care of a lot of things that even when it comes to sales, making sure processes are established, making sure that we are moving everything in the right pipeline and the right funnel. And so that's been one of the things that we kind of split the duties on pretty well. And even at that, I'm also the one changing out ceiling tiles here at our distillery because somebody's got to do the manual labor. And right now it's me.
Right. So what does Ryan do? What's his focus?
Yeah. So Ryan's focus, he's on the CEO role. And mostly that focus is really there to help establish and flourish a lot of the business relationships because we're a very different, unique company when it is inside of the bourbon whiskey industry. So our concept, our bottling is called Pursuit United, where we partner and we actually contract distill our whiskey with 4 other distilleries. And we do that because we don't want to build a distillery. That would be like us starting our careers over. We don't really want to do that when we feel that you can put good whiskey into a barrel, but a lot of us, we don't drink the white dog or the moonshine that you are putting into, before you put in a barrel. We want what comes after it, after it's been in the barrel 4, 5, 6, 8, whatever years. So we really look at the maturation and the blending process is really our key factor. And as a part of that, we blend all these different distilleries together. So he takes on the role of making sure that we keep these relationships going well with our established contract distillation partners, finding other new partners. He also leads some of the sales initiatives as well, because as a part of this business, you do have to work with distributors. I think that's probably the hardest thing that we've learned getting into the whiskey industry is that your customers are 2 steps removed from you. You can't sell directly to them. It's illegal to actually do that. So if somebody in Wyoming wants to buy our product, unfortunately, you can't. And if even somebody in Kentucky wants to buy directly from us, up until recently, we really couldn't do that either, because I have to get a distributor that wants to carry our product. So I got to convince them and sell them why they should go do it. And they have to go and sell it to the retailer, and the retailer has to be sold onto it before they even try to push the product into the market or onto another customer. So you have multiple layers that you removed. And so it's a continual educational hurdle of making sure that you have your distributors and your retail partners, that they understand the product. And it's really hard for a small business because we don't have the sales force to actually go and say, let's go ahead and, we'll staff people in every single major market, and they go to liquor stores and they go and introduce themselves and they make sure that product's on the shelf. Like, we just can't do that. So we've had to be very nimble and very, I guess you could say, startup-ish in regards of how we've been able to do that. And we've really leaned a lot on our existing community that we built through Bourbon Pursuit to be able to build this brand ambassador program. So I kind of lean on that. I take care of our brand ambassador program. Ryan takes care of a lot of the sales and orientation. We both take on a role of marketing. It's very much just who wants to wear one of the 15 hats today. That's definitely what we have to do to make this successful.
Okay. So you touched on it a little bit, but I want to bring it out a little more clearly to people who don't know you and what you're doing. But there's a lot of bourbon distillers out there and blenders and all that. So what is it that makes you special? What is it that makes Pursuit Spirits stand out in your mind?
Yeah, thank you for teeing that up. That's always one of the things that we are always evolving and talking about our story and making sure that when we really got into this, we wanted to make sure that we are different. Because Mark, you know this as well as anybody else, because I know you're big into bourbon, but anybody that's not big into bourbon, if you understood what happens in what's called the bulk or the sourced whiskey market, there's really only like 2 or 3 distilleries that make a load of the whiskey that's on the shelf that you do see. And once you get smart and you understand exactly like what are the distilleries, who are the ones that, that's not to say it's anything wrong, but there's 6 major distilleries that are in Kentucky, and they all have maybe 3 or 4 different mash bills they make, but they make 50 to 75 different labels. And so the shelves are just littered with that. Or there's this other distillery that's in Southern Indiana that makes a ton of rye whiskey. It also makes a ton of bourbon, and it's all the same whiskey that's just bottled differently. And that's what a lot of people in the bulk or sourced market, that's what they do. They just basically try to spin a story on it. For us, we really saw that and we said, we are not going to be one of those brands. We need to make sure that we create our own unique flavor profile. How are we going to be different than somebody else that's there in the market? And that's where we kind of get back into your former point there about talking about blending. So instead of us just buying one particular bourbon from one particular distillery and putting that in a bottle and repackaging it, well, we would be competing directly with that distillery. Or if that distillery was to sell that whiskey to somebody else, well, our whiskey is no different than what's in another bottle. So we wanted to make sure we had that differentiating factor to know that our whiskey can't be replicated by anybody else. So by blending, what we are able to do is we have our own proprietary ratios. We have our own proprietary formulas. We actually do our own contract distillation now. So we're not buying on the source market instead, where we have 4 different partner distilleries that make everything to our spec. And so by doing that, we can guarantee that our whiskey will be different and unlike anything else that is out there on the market. A lot of people, they buy some stuff and they'll either like rebarrel it or rechar it or just do something that's slightly modified. We kind of started from the ground up and built it from there. knowing that we don't have to worry about anybody else coming in and trying to compete with our flavor profile, because ours will always be different than anything else that you can get on the shelf.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. So I knew some of that, but even some of that's new to me as well. So appreciate you sharing that. So what's something else that you wish people understood about your brand?
Oh, wow. I like that question. I think that the one thing that we want to get people to know about our brand is like, who's it coming from? Because it's a lot easier to kind of look at a brand on the shelf. Let's say Maker's Mark, for example. Great whiskey. But do you know who made that? Do you know what the story is behind the label? Do you know exactly who put that together, the packaging? I think for what we look at is like, we want to put a better name to the word craft, because Makers, for all better intents and purposes, and a lot of them, it's a huge factory and they make a ton of whiskey. They put a bunch of bottles out there. They're an international brand, and you can't get that way by having a touch point at some point or another. So having the podcast, I feel that puts us in a very unique situation where people can trust us in regards of knowing that whatever we put our stamp of approval on, who's behind it. You don't know who's behind your bottle of Jim Beam or Maker's Mark or anything like that, because they're pumping out hundreds of thousands of bottles every single day. We're still always going to be a very boutique brand. And the way that we have to do everything right now is we have to taste every single barrel, because the way that whiskey works and bourbon works is that, let's say you want to do a quote unquote small batch. And Mark, you probably know this too, is that there's no actually legal definition of the word small batch. So small batch by Maker's Mark standards could be 10,000 barrels. It could be 100. For us, our regular batch size is around 10. And you don't get consistency until you are doing hundreds of barrels at a time. So we have to make sure that we taste every single barrel and it fits a flavor profile that we are going to try and align and make it as consistent as possible. It will never be always consistent because of how small and unique that we're doing. But for us, we look at that and we say like, well, now I know that if you're going to try our product and you come back again, you're going to have a slight variation. You're always going to be finding something brand new in our whiskey every single time you try it. Now, as much as I'd love to say like, oh, you loved it once, well, just buy it 100 times. You're always going to love it. But we can't do that. And I really hope that we give people that sense of adventure when you are trying to find whiskey and find something that really speaks to you. Because for us, we're always going to be able to position it as a way that you're going to come back to it and you're going to be like, listen, I really love this once and I'm going to come back to it again. It might be a little bit different. I hope I like it just as much or maybe even more than I liked it last time.
So marketing, you guys are doing kind of almost like the definition of guerrilla marketing, right? Obviously, the podcast has been a big marketing tool. So what other types of marketing are you doing that are working for you? How else are you getting yourself in front of the bourbon drinking public?
Yeah, the podcast is definitely the first and foremost way to do it. We already had that established brand with Bourbon Pursuit, and we already had the footprint of existing users that were out there, or sorry, users, listeners. I come from a tech background, so we always say users. And we've always had to try to figure out, well, what's going to happen? Like, how are we going to sell that next bottle? Because we did look at it and we kind of, I don't want to say we saturated our existing audience because we have not even tapped a percentage of it. We looked at it and we said, oh, we've got these people, like they'll buy a bottle. That's not really the case. And not only that is even the amount of bourbon drinking population that's out there, there is, if you're listening to our podcast, you are a fraction of the bourbon drinking population. We always call it like the 1%ers of bourbon because you're really into it. But that's not how the other 99% of people think. They just want a good bottle that tastes good and costs the right amount that they're willing to spend for whatever it is. They're not really into, they don't care about the char level. They don't care about all these different things that we go really nerdy over. So for us, we had to try to figure out, well, how do we break into that broader consumer market? And of course, we've been able to, thankfully, we have the podcast. We swap advertisements in newspapers and trade magazines and all this other kind of stuff and be able to do that. And then you'll hear advertisements on Bourbon Pursuit. But at the same exact time, we also said you have to build things on essentially the Costco model, right? Try before you buy. You're walking around, you got those samples. And that's what I had mentioned earlier. We built out this brand ambassador program. And that is the best way to get scans at a register. We sponsor about 40-ish different whiskey festivals in the 9 different markets that we do. And that's great because we get a ton of people at one time to try the product, but they're not necessarily buying it right then and there. So if you've ever been into a Total Wine or your local liquor store and you kind of see those people that are handing out samples and stuff like that, those are typically people that are been hired through an agency to, and they might be doing Irish whiskey today. They're doing orange flavored vodka tomorrow. They have no idea what they're doing. We looked at that and, well, I did the economic study, and you usually pay about $150 per one of those people to be there to talk about your brand for 3 hours. So it's $50 an hour, plus they have to buy a bottle or two or whatever it is, and you have to pay for that bottle, and you don't know what happens to that bottle. That bottle's theirs when they take it home. Maybe it ends up on a college dorm party or something like that. Who really knows what happens with it? But I did the economics, and I said, if we had to pay a tasting agency to do tastings all around the country, we will go broke making this happen. So I said, how do we find people that are going to have, like, they're really going to care about our success? Like, they want to be a part of this brand, and they're whiskey geeks. And that's where we tapped into our existing audience. And I really painted this picture for them. And I said, I will pay you to talk about whiskey, because you're going to talk about whiskey anyway. So you might as well get paid to do it. And that's been a really good selling point. And a lot of people have loved it. We have people that are post-grad, that are in college. We have retirees and everybody in between that is a part of our ambassador program. So there's about 72 different people now that are part of our program, and they are in the 9 different markets. They work with different liquor stores, and they'll set up tastings. And these aren't people that you go in and try to ask a question. They look at you with a blank stare. I mean, these are people that they know the product. They know the product inside and out. They have a vested interest in the success, and they truly care about being there. And I think that's been one of the great things about this, is that we are able to lean on their expertise and making sure that it's just not, somebody that can fog a mirror that's standing there, but instead it's somebody that can engage with a customer, that can answer the hard questions. And that's just been one of the big keys to our success in our marketing, is making sure that we can lean on this community of people to help get scans at the register and get bottles out there in the market as well.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. So you recently started a new experience. You kind of added an experience to your offerings. Tell everybody a little bit about that, how that came about.
Yeah, so this is actually kind of brand new. We've been soft launching it for the past 2 months, and we'll be launching it officially towards the end of this year in 23, and it'll be completely available in 24. But as a part of us getting into the whiskey business, we had to have a home. We had to establish ourselves, because the way that the tax laws are written says that if you have your own DSP license, or distilled spirits producer, you pay a crap ton less of taxes than if we were to bottle with a larger facility. And since we were bottling with a larger facility, I said, let's go ahead and try to find a home for ourselves. We finally found a home. It was about 7 months of actually just waiting, getting liquor licenses and all this other kind of stuff approved. But once we did that, we started looking at, well, we need to figure out how we can get more people behind the brand. How do you get people? And since we're here in Louisville already, people are coming here for the Bourbon Trail, and how popular it's gotten is that every place is sold out. So we will gladly take everybody's spillover traffic, but we also wanted to create something that's new and unique that you can't do anywhere else on the Bourbon Trail as well. And another preimpetus for all this happening was we've also signed a lease on Whiskey Row in downtown Louisville. And so we'll be having our real big visitor center experience that'll be there on Whiskey Row. But in the meantime, we've been piloting this program at our distillery. But what we are doing is allowing people to come in and taste whiskey directly from the barrel, and you get your own barrel pick type of experience. For anybody that's unaware or unaccustomed to this, going on a barrel pick is something that not everybody gets to do unless you're in a whiskey society or you own a liquor store. The odds of you actually going and selecting your own barrel, it's pretty rare. But for us whiskey geeks, it's like the Holy Grail. We love doing it.
Yeah.
It's
Awesome.
it's so much fun. And so I said, how do we give that experience to everybody, but on such a smaller scale that all they have to do is take one bottle home with them at the very minimum? And that's what we've been building, is actually giving people the opportunity to actually come to our facility and taste through 6, 8, 10 barrels, sort of like depends on what we have, and find the whiskey in the barrel that speaks to you. And then you'll actually go and grab a bottle. You'll go and grab a whiskey thief. It's not like some other ones that are here that do tours where they have a fill your own bottle experience, but it feels very commercial, very Disney-like, where you put a bottle underneath the spigot, you pull a lever, and all of a sudden the bottle fills up. For ours, we actually use the tools that we utilize to actually pull whiskey out of the barrels to get samples. It's called a whiskey thief. So you grab your whiskey thief, you grab a bottle, and you fill it up by hand. And then you take that bottle over to the bottling line. You'll actually use the pneumatic corker, put the cork on it, use the labeling machine, do that. Then you'll kind of like just write some stuff on the side to commemorate the day. And it's been a really good reception so far. And we're continually refining it before we really bring this all out to the public. But anybody that's interested, make sure you just check out pursuitspirits.com. There'll be a button at the top right that says visit us, and you can book your experience there and come say hello.
Yeah. When I saw that come out, it was like, can't wait for that to go big in public. And you'll be like the other distilleries where you're booked out. And that's a good problem to have.
Yeah. And that's been one of the interesting thing as this started. Ryan and I, we noticed right away, because we were the ones actually leading the experiences for the first few of them. And it didn't take more than 2 of these to go, yeah, we can't do these forever. We've got to find help. And so we're bringing on some more help to make sure that we can provide a really good consumer experience and have people that kind of be the extensions of Ryan and I.
Looking ahead, like I know you guys do, are you goal setters? Are you big vision? Are you seat of the pants, make stuff up every month? Kind of what's your process for thinking about where you want to go with your business? Or a little bit of all the above?
Yeah, that's the problem. It's a little bit all the above, because in this industry, you have to be planning at minimum 4 to 6 years out, because you're putting down whiskey now that you can't sell until 4 to 6 years down the line. And you have to sit there and project to say, okay, did I put down enough whiskey? Was this enough? Is it too much? Are we going to sit on a surplus? What do we do? And to be able to sit there and do that is one thing. And so you're always continually thinking about product development. It's in the back of your mind. So not only are we just thinking about stuff 4 to 6 years from now, we're also thinking about stuff 4 to 6 months from now. What do we do to make sure that we are staying in front of the consumer? Because the whiskey world has changed so much that it's kind of, how do you chase the shiny red ball? How do you stay in front of the consumers on a weekly basis so that they're always talking about you? So we're constantly thinking of new products, new limited editions, new small releases, like whatever it is, to kind of create that tension that people need to really pull for your brand. So we're always doing that. And then, like I said, then it gets down to the day-to-day sort of stuff. So whether you're crawling out of emails, or whether you're dealing with taxes in the federal government, or, as I said earlier today, switching out ceiling tiles because somebody's got to do the manual labor around here. We're always trying to think of like the other things to, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of work that keeps us busy. But when we start thinking about strategy and vision and future and everything like that, I think we've been very pointed in what we're doing. When we actually started trying to figure out for our United project, that's when we kind of got serious about our whiskey business, because I did a 10-year projection and roadmap to say, if we bought 4, 3, 2, 1 in new make, and we started putting down X amount of new make, we said, okay, we'll start off at 500 barrels. Well, what if we did 800 barrels? Well, what if we did 1,300 barrels? And started figuring out and extrapolating, well, how much whiskey can you get from the barrel? What's the proof point? And how many bottles can you get out of it? Okay, well, how much glass do you need? And I started basically building the financial model and roadmap for 10 years. And that's when we started looking at, okay, well, this is the barometer, and I think this is what we can hit. And this is where also we can hit by just having us manage it, because we have no outside investors right now. It's just Ryan and I doing it and making sure that we don't need to take any outside investment unless we really need it. But for us, we looked at that as kind of like, this is the projections of where we can go. And now we just have to make sure that we are going by that, because the banks want to make sure that we're going by that as well. Because now we're taking out essentially asset-based loans on all of the barrels, which is a fantastic business model because it's an appreciating asset. So you make a $800 barrel of new make today. In a few months, it's worth $1,000. In 2 years, it's worth, 18 to 2,000. So it continually appreciates, but the banks want to make sure that you're hitting your sales goals and your sales numbers as well, to make sure that you can keep lending against those barrels too.
Where do you and Ryan see the business 5 years from now?
5 years from now, well, we'll have hopefully our downtown locations nice and pretty. We've got a lot of people that are coming through there. And by 28, 29, and maybe I should get into closer to 2030, the way at least the financial modeling had worked out is that the business might be able to bankroll itself and we'll be able to kind of be debt free. That's been the thing that's kind of been the hardest, is that we looked at it and we said, well, we can't even pay ourselves really until 2026 of just continually having to reinvest it back in the business, pay off friends and family loans that we got early on and everything like that as well. So for us, having I guess, should I say for me, and Ryan, getting out of our day jobs, like that's number one. We want to make whiskey a full-time thing, and we want to make sure that we're living comfortably. And I think the biggest thing, even for our wives, is they want us to sleep at night, because it doesn't happen right now. It's I'm sure every other business owner you talk to, you've got ideas and you've got 20 things that you're always constantly trying to run through your head and trying to figure out what's next, or how do we pivot, or how do we market this, or how do we change this. And yeah, so waking up at 2 a.m. and writing something at Evernote is still a very real thing that we do.
Yeah, I remember those days. It's been awesome. Covered a lot of ground. That's a lot of really great information. So last few questions here, just kind of quick, and then we'll wrap up. So what's your key to success, Kenny?
Oh gosh. Well, you'd have to actually call us a success first to actually say what's the key. I mean, people look at what I do and they're enamored with like the tenacity that we have, because this is not a industry for the faint of heart. There's a lot of work and effort that goes into making this a success. And, working 70, 80 hours a week, that's pretty normal for us right now. And, of course, we want to not do that going into the future. We want to make sure we get some more time back on ourselves. But for us, we also look at that and we say, how do we continue to build upon this? And I still think that we haven't really truly reached our pinnacle of success yet. I think we still have more time to go, but I think that's the character traits that we do have of what we're doing to make sure that we are putting ourselves in a position that we will be successful. We haven't taken on a bunch of debt. We manage this like we treat it like a real business. It's not just a fun side project or side hobby. It is a real business. We make sure that we put everything into it. And at the end of the day, this is all in customer service. And so we want to make sure we put the best product and the best experience in front of people too.
Okay, awesome. So Kenny, what's one piece of advice that you would give to someone else looking to break into the business?
So other than that would be the one thing. I mean, breaking into the whiskey business is really hard. There's a good quote that somebody said on the podcast that says, if you want to start a whiskey brand, you need $10 million. You need $5 million in whiskey and $5 million in marketing. So we definitely underestimated how much was needing to go into the marketing side of things. There's definitely a ton of investment has to go there. There's the reason why people bring on investors to try to make that happen, to try to go and scale really fast. And there's definitely multiple ways to get into it, whether you are trying to kind of go wide and thin, or whether you go sort of like, narrow and deep. And there's trying to figure out, how do you tackle the market? Because, they say you should own your backyard, but I think that there's an asterisk that should be in there that says, unless you live in Kentucky, because there's so much bourbon around here. So there's definitely, try to figure out, how are you going to be different in this marketplace? I think that's one of the things that why Ryan and I, why we love what we do, is because we truly are creating a unique product. It's not something else that's just repackaged into another bottle that anybody can go and recreate, but instead it's just something truly different and truly unique. And we're not relying on, just like buying stuff from the same source and finishing it in a crazy barrel and trying to just, ride that train. It's a wave that's certainly going right now. And we kind of see things that'll hopefully market correct in time, where people want to just drink regular bourbon, not all this finished stuff that we do see. But for us, we just want to make sure we stay true to ourselves. And I think as advice is to just try to figure out, well, what's going to make you different and unique, and be passionate about it, because this is a business that will make you go gray really quick.
Oh, I'll bet. Yeah. So what's one book you're reading or that you've read recently that you would recommend to other business owners?
Yeah, I'm a podcaster, so I do a lot of audiobooks, if it's anything. And I'm a huge fan of Seth Godin, and I listened to his book recently, This Is Marketing. And it was I loved it. Seth is a very influential person. I listen to his podcast every single week as well. It's just one of those things that I try to look and see exactly like, well, how has he modeled things in how it works for the 92 different industries that he's consulted with, and how do we bring it back into bourbon? And so it's been one of those things that I'm continually listening to him for insight and growth and everything like that too.
Yeah, Seth's an amazing source of marketing knowledge and just really rethinking what marketing is.
Totally.
So if I had a magic wand, I could wave it over your business and improve one aspect of your business tomorrow, what would you want to improve?
Sales and distribution. This is, as I'd mentioned before, you're always 2 steps removed. And it is a constant juggling of making sure that you're looking at distributor reports every single week, and you are looking at sales numbers, and you are talking to your distributing partners and going, hey, like, what's going on here? Why are the numbers down? Or what are we getting billed back on this for? And it's one of those things, like, we're really stretched thin and being able to do that. And we were smart early on. We paid a consultant to come in and help us do sales and distribution, because sales and distribution, like, we've had people like, hey, I'd love to be your VP of sales. I'm like, okay, well, how many liquor companies you work for? Distributors are like, oh no, I worked in, Toys R Us or something. I'm like,
Right.
You have no freaking idea of what it takes to do this inside the liquor industry. I'd say it's a little bit like the Wild West, but there's definitely a lot of just weird gray areas, and you just have to have this different mindset and mentality of just how sales works. And that would probably be the one thing we struggle with the most. That would be awesome to fix.
Okay. Before I get into my very last question, how can people follow you? Where are the different places, different channels that people can follow you, either the podcast or Pursuit directly?
Yeah. So our brand, of course, Pursuit Spirits, is really what we're leading with nowadays. So pursuitspirits.com. We're also on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Pursuit Spirits. And then the podcast will always be there. It is a well-oiled machine. We release 3 episodes every single week. And so if you really want to get really nerdy about bourbon, that's the best way to go check it out. So bourbonpursuit.com. And of course, it's on all the socials as well. And if you go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and type in the word bourbon under podcast, will be the #1 result. So make sure you start there, but always finish it up by getting yourself a bottle of Pursuit United and toasting with us when you're listening.
All right. Awesome. So last question, Kenny, what inspires you the most right now?
I love that question. I mean, for me, it's a sense of knowing that I'm accomplishing something. This is like a first-time entrepreneurship for me, and I'm loving it. I'm loving every single second of it. I love the grit, the hard work, the startup life. I've worked in comfy, cushy tech jobs for most of it. And now that I'm getting my hands dirty, and I love to hopefully look back at this one day if we don't go broke and saying, like, how fun was this that we did all this by hand, and we built this from scratch, and we did it from a podcast. Like, nobody can say that. And so I'm very determined in making sure that happens. So I have this internal fire in me to really make this succeed, and I'm putting everything that I can behind it to try to make that happen too. And I think that's one of those things that I look at and I say, I want to look back on it in 20, 30 years when I'm retired, and fingers crossed, maybe I can do it in 10 or 15. But, I could look back when I'm retired and say, like, oh man, I built that. Like, how cool is that? And even better if it's something that, we can make generational to pass down to our kids and stuff like that too.
Awesome. I love that. Well, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Kenny Coleman, co-founder, COO of Pursuit Spirits, and also the Bourbon Pursuit podcast, which you have to listen to if you want to learn about bourbon. It's amazing. Kenny, thank you for being with us. And listeners, thank you so much for listening in today and watching us. Go ahead and subscribe to our channel so that you can get every single interview as it comes out. So Kenny, thank you for being on here today and for sharing your wisdom and your thoughts and your amazing story.
I appreciate it, Mark. Thanks for letting me be on this side of the microphone.
All right. Thanks a lot.